How bad is America's romantic recession? In recent years, the United States has been witnessing a quiet but profound social shift, one that doesn't dominate headlines like inflation or elections, yet deeply affects millions of lives. This phenomenon is increasingly referred to as America's romantic recession. It describes a noticeable decline in dating, long-term relationships, marriage, and emotional intimacy, particularly among young adults. The question is no longer whether this recession exists, but how deep it truly is, and what it means for the future of American society. Romantic connection has long been considered a cornerstone of the American dream. From classic Hollywood love stories to cultural ideals centered around marriage, companionship, and family life, romance has shaped social expectations for generations. However, today's reality looks very different. Fewer people are dating, fewer are marrying, and many are choosing to remain single longer or permanently. This shift is not accidental. It is the result of intertwined economic, psychological, technological, and cultural forces. The numbers tell a stark story. Statistical trends clearly show that romance in America is declining. Marriage rates are at historic lows, while the average age of first marriage continues to rise. At the same time, surveys indicate that a growing number of Americans, especially those under 35, report feeling lonely, emotionally disconnected, or uninterested in romantic relationships altogether. Dating activity has also dropped sharply. Many young adults say they are dating less frequently than previous generations, and some have stopped trying entirely. What's particularly striking is that this decline is happening despite more tools for connection than ever before. Dating apps, social media, and instant messaging were supposed to make romance easier. But for many, they've done the opposite. Economic pressure and the cost of love. One of the most powerful drivers of the romantic recession is economic stress. In the United States, financial stability has traditionally been linked to relationship formation. Yet today, many Americans, especially millennials and Gen Z, face stagnant wages, student loan debt, high housing costs, and job insecurity. Romantic relationships require time, emotional energy, and often financial investment. Dating is expensive. Building a life together is even more so. For many Americans struggling to make ends meet, romance feels like a luxury rather than a priority. As a result, people delay relationships until they feel financially ready, a point that, for some, never arrives. This economic anxiety also affects self-perception. Many individuals feel they are not successful enough to be desirable partners, leading to avoidance of dating altogether. Love, once seen as emotional fulfillment, increasingly feels like a financial risk. Technology, connecting us while pulling us apart. Technology plays a paradoxical role in America's romantic recession. Dating apps promise endless options, but in reality, they often create choice overload, superficial interactions, and emotional burnout. Swiping culture encourages snap judgments based on appearance, reducing complex human beings to profiles and photos. Instead of fostering commitment, dating apps can promote a mindset of constant replacement, always believing someone better is just one swipe away. This undermines emotional investment and makes it harder for relationships to deepen. Many users report feeling disposable, rejected, or emotionally exhausted after prolonged app usage. Beyond dating apps, social media also shapes unrealistic expectations of love. Constant exposure to curated images of perfect relationships creates comparison, dissatisfaction, and fear of settling. Real relationships, with their imperfections and emotional labor, struggle to compete with idealized online. The psychology of avoidance and emotional fatigue. Another critical factor is psychological exhaustion. Modern American life is fast-paced, competitive, and mentally demanding. People are overwhelmed by work stress, social pressures, and information overload. In this environment, emotional vulnerability, the foundation of romance, can feel risky and draining. Many Americans have developed avoidant attitudes toward intimacy, not because they don't want love, but because they fear rejection, heartbreak, or emotional dependence. Past relationship trauma, combined with a culture that emphasizes self-reliance and independence, makes commitment feel threatening rather than comforting. There is also a growing normalization of emotional detachment. Casual relationships, situationships, and non-committal connections are increasingly common. While these arrangements may offer short-term comfort, they often fail to provide long-term emotional security, reinforcing feelings of emptiness and loneliness. Changing gender expectations and relationship confusion. The romantic recession is also shaped by shifting gender roles and expectations. Traditional relationship norms have changed rapidly, but new norms have not fully stabilized. Many men and women feel uncertain about what is expected of them in modern relationships. Some men report feeling disengaged from dating due to social pressures, fear of rejection, or confusion about masculinity in a changing cultural landscape. Meanwhile, many women express frustration with emotional unavailability, lack of commitment, or unequal emotional labor in relationships. This mutual dissatisfaction creates a cycle of mistrust. Instead of collaboration, dating increasingly feels adversarial, where both sides feel misunderstood, undervalued, or exhausted. Loneliness, the silent epidemic. Perhaps the most troubling consequence of America's romantic recession is widespread loneliness. The U.S. Surgeon General has already identified loneliness as a public health concern. Romantic relationships are not the only source of connection, but they play a crucial role in emotional well-being. When romantic bonds weaken, individuals often lose a major source of emotional support. This can contribute to anxiety, depression, sleep problems, and reduced life satisfaction. The decline of romance is not just about dating, it's about mental health, social cohesion, and human connection. Is romance dead, or just transforming? Despite these challenges, it would be premature to declare romance dead in America. Instead, it may be undergoing a painful transformation. Many people are rejecting traditional relationship timelines and seeking deeper, more intentional connections. There is growing interest in emotional intelligence, therapy, communication skills, and self-awareness. Some Americans are choosing to step away from dating temporarily to heal, grow, and redefine what love means to them. Others are forming relationships later in life, but with greater clarity and purpose. The decline in quantity may eventually lead to an improvement in quality. In the United States, a nation built on ideals of freedom, pursuit of happiness, and human connection, romantic love has always held a special place. Love has been celebrated not only as a private emotion but as a social institution, shaping families, communities, and even national identity. Yet today, beneath the surface of modern life, America is facing a profound and unsettling shift, a romantic recession. This recession is not marked by empty stores or collapsing banks, but by empty hearts, delayed commitments, and fading intimacy. It is quiet, gradual, and deeply personal, and yet its consequences are collective. Romantic decline as a social phenomenon. From an academic perspective, romance is not merely an emotional experience. It is a social system embedded in economic conditions, cultural norms, and psychological well-being. Sociologists have long argued that intimate relationships function as stabilizing forces within society. When those relationships weaken, the effects ripple outward. Empirical evidence confirms this decline. Marriage rates in the United States have reached historic lows, while cohabitation without commitment and long-term singlehood have increased. More strikingly, surveys reveal that a growing proportion of young adults report little to no interest in romantic relationships. This is not indifference, it is often exhaustion. From a psychological lens, this signals a shift from secure attachment patterns toward avoidance and emotional withdrawal. People are not rejecting love because they do not need it. They are stepping back because love increasingly feels unsafe, uncertain, and costly. The emotional weight of economic insecurity. Economic stress is one of the strongest predictors of delayed or avoided romantic commitment. In the American context, financial independence has historically been tied to adulthood and partnership formation. Today, however, student debt, rising housing costs, and job precarity have disrupted this pathway. According to behavioral psychology, chronic financial stress activates survival-oriented thinking. When individuals are focused on economic stability, their cognitive and emotional resources for intimacy shrink. Love becomes secondary to survival. Emotionally, this creates shame and self-doubt. Many Americans internalize economic struggle as personal failure, leading to feelings of unworthiness in romantic contexts. People withdraw not because they lack desire, but because they fear being a burden or being judged. Technology and the commodification of love. Modern dating in America is increasingly mediated by technology. From an academic standpoint, dating apps represent the marketization of intimacy, where human connection is filtered through algorithms, efficiency, and visual appeal. Psychological studies suggest that excessive choice leads to dissatisfaction and commitment anxiety. When partners appear replaceable, emotional investment declines. Love becomes transactional, and vulnerability feels irrational. On an emotional level, many Americans describe dating as dehumanizing. Rejection is frequent, silent, and impersonal. Ghosting replaces closure. Over time, this erodes self-esteem and reinforces emotional numbness. The tragedy is that while technology promises connection, it often deepens isolation, emotional fatigue, and the fear of vulnerability. Perhaps the most overlooked factor in America's romantic recession is emotional burnout. Modern life demands constant performance. At work, online, and even in relationships, emotional availability now feels like another form of labor. From a clinical psychology perspective, repeated emotional disappointments can lead to learned avoidance. Individuals begin to associate intimacy with pain rather than comfort. As a result, many adopt defensive independence, convincing themselves they are better off alone. Yet beneath this independence often lies unacknowledged grief, the grief of unmet emotional needs. Gender dynamics and relational uncertainty. The transformation of gender roles has created both progress and confusion. While equality has expanded opportunities, it has also disrupted traditional scripts for romance without fully replacing them. Men often report feeling uncertain about expectations and fearful of rejection or misinterpretation. Women frequently express frustration with emotional inconsistency and lack of commitment. These experiences foster mistrust, reinforcing cycles of disengagement. Academically, this reflects a normative gap, a space where old rules no longer apply and new ones are still forming. Loneliness as a public health crisis. Loneliness is not merely an emotional state. It is a measurable risk factor for mental and physical health. Research links chronic loneliness to depression, anxiety, cardiovascular disease, and reduced life expectancy. Romantic relationships are not the sole cure for loneliness, but they serve as a critical source of emotional regulation and identity affirmation. The erosion of romance thus contributes to a broader crisis of social disconnection in American society. Emotionally, loneliness does not always feel dramatic. Often, it feels like quiet invisibility. Is love failing or being reimagined? Despite these challenges, it is important to resist narratives of despair. From a developmental perspective, periods of relational decline often precede transformation. Many Americans are questioning superficial connections and seeking emotionally mature, intentional relationships. There is growing awareness around therapy, attachment styles, emotional intelligence, and communication skills. These trends suggest not the death of romance, but its evolution. The current recession may be a necessary reckoning, forcing society to confront the ways modern life has crowded out intimacy. Love in an age of exhaustion. America's romantic recession is not a lack of love. It is a crisis of conditions. People still long for connection, safety, and belonging. What has changed is the environment in which love is expected to survive. To revive romance, American society must slow down, reduce economic and emotional pressure, and rehumanize connection. Love cannot flourish in constant uncertainty. Romance has always adapted to history. The question is not whether love will survive, but whether we are willing to create a world where it can. Why romance is struggling. To fully understand America's romantic recession, we must step beyond surface behaviors and examine the theoretical foundations of human relationships. Psychology and sociology offer powerful lenses to explain why intimacy feels so fragile today. Attachment theory suggests that early relational experiences shape how individuals connect in adulthood. In recent decades, rising family instability, emotional neglect, and digital overexposure have contributed to an increase in avoidant and anxious attachment styles. In simple terms, many Americans either fear closeness or crave it while expecting abandonment. Both patterns undermine stable, long-term romance. From the perspective of social exchange theory, relationships are evaluated through perceived costs and rewards. In today's America, the perceived costs of romance, emotional labor, financial pressure, risk of heartbreak, often outweigh the expected benefits. When love is framed as a high-risk investment, people naturally hesitate. Meanwhile, self-determination theory emphasizes the human need for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Modern American culture strongly rewards autonomy and achievement, often at the expense of relatedness. As individuals chase independence and success, emotional interdependence is quietly devalued. The culture of hyperindependence. Emotionally, one of the most defining features of contemporary American life is hyperindependence. From an early age, people are taught to rely on themselves, protect their boundaries, and avoid emotional dependence. While independence is empowering, its extreme form can become isolating. Romantic relationships, by nature, require vulnerability, compromise, and emotional risk. But in a culture that glorifies self-sufficiency, needing someone can feel like weakness. Many Americans internalize the idea that love should not disrupt their personal goals, routines, or emotional comfort. As a result, romance is increasingly postponed until it feels convenient, a condition that rarely arrives. Emotional numbness in the age of constant stimulation. Another critical but rarely discussed factor is emotional numbness. The American mind is constantly stimulated by news cycles, social media, entertainment, and productivity demands. This overstimulation dulls emotional sensitivity. Romantic connection requires presence, patience, and emotional depth. Yet many people feel too distracted or mentally exhausted to fully engage. Love becomes shallow not because people want it that way, but because they lack the emotional energy to go deeper. Psychologically, this leads to detachment as a coping mechanism. When emotions feel overwhelming, people shut down, not realizing that numbness also blocks joy, intimacy, and love. Romance and mental health. A two-way relationship. The relationship between romance and mental health is deeply interconnected. Poor mental health reduces relationship capacity, while lack of intimacy worsens mental health outcomes. In the United States, anxiety and depression rates have risen sharply, particularly among young adults. These conditions often come with low self-worth, fear of rejection, and emotional withdrawal. Dating under these conditions feels unsafe. At the same time, the absence of supportive romantic bonds removes a crucial buffer against stress. Humans are wired for connection. When that connection is missing, psychological resilience declines. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Poor mental health discourages romance, and lack of romance deepens emotional distress. What romance used to offer and what is missing now. Historically, romantic relationships provided more than affection. They offered identity, meaning, and emotional grounding. Partners were witnesses to each other's lives, sharing struggles, growth, and dreams. Today, many relationships lack this depth. Emotional availability has been replaced by ambiguity. Commitment has been replaced by flexibility. While freedom has increased, emotional security has decreased. Emotionally, this leaves people feeling replaceable rather than chosen. A generation caught between hope and fear. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of America's romantic recession is that people still want love. Surveys consistently show that most Americans desire deep, meaningful relationships. The problem is not desire, it is fear. Fear of choosing wrong. Fear of wasting time. Fear of being hurt. Fear of vulnerability in an unforgiving world. This generation stands at a crossroads, torn between longing for intimacy and protecting itself from pain. A quiet question facing American society. The romantic recession raises a fundamental question. What kind of society are we building if love feels unsustainable? Romance is not a distraction from productivity or progress. It is a source of emotional regulation, moral development, and social stability. When intimacy declines, trust declines. When trust declines, communities weaken. This is not just a personal issue. It is a cultural one. Transition to the final reflection. As we move toward the final part of this discussion, one truth becomes clear. America does not suffer from a lack of romantic opportunity. It suffers from a lack of emotional conditions that allow love to thrive. The final question is not how bad the romantic recession is, but whether America is willing to change the way it lives, works, and connects to reverse it. The sexual dimension of America's romantic recession. Any serious discussion of America's romantic recession remains incomplete without addressing its most intimate layer: sexual relationships. Sexual connection is not separate from romance. It is one of its deepest expressions. When romantic bonds weaken, sexual intimacy does not disappear, but it often becomes detached, transactional, or emotionally hollow. From an academic standpoint, sexual intimacy functions as both a bonding mechanism and an indicator of relational health. When emotional security declines, sexual relationships shift from connection-based experiences to performance-based encounters. This shift is increasingly visible in American dating culture. Desire in decline, the psychology of sexual disengagement. Despite greater sexual freedom than any previous generation, many Americans report lower sexual satisfaction and declining desire. This paradox has drawn increasing attention from psychologists and public health researchers. Chronic stress, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion suppress libido. When individuals are mentally overwhelmed, sexual desire becomes muted, not because attraction is absent, but because the nervous system remains in a state of alert rather than relaxation. Intimacy requires safety. Many Americans do not feel safe enough, emotionally or psychologically, to fully desire. Sex, once a space of closeness and vulnerability, is increasingly experienced as pressure, expectation, or evaluation. Casual sex and the loss of emotional anchoring. Casual sexual relationships have become more normalized in the United States, often framed as symbols of empowerment and autonomy. While such relationships can be healthy when chosen consciously, research suggests that emotionally unanchored sexual encounters often fail to meet deeper psychological needs. Attachment research shows that sexual intimacy activates bonding hormones linked to emotional connection. When sex occurs without clarity, trust, or continuity, it can intensify feelings of emptiness rather than fulfillment. Emotionally, many individuals report feeling physically close but emotionally distant, a condition more painful than loneliness itself. Consent, safety, and emotional trust. Modern American discourse rightly emphasizes consent, yet consent alone does not guarantee intimacy. Emotional trust, the sense of being seen, respected, and emotionally safe, is equally essential for fulfilling sexual relationships. In a climate of mistrust and fear of vulnerability, people often protect themselves by limiting emotional exposure. This defensive posture carries into sexual encounters, where openness is replaced by caution and connection is replaced by control. Sex becomes safer but also colder. Performance culture and sexual anxiety. Another defining feature of contemporary sexual relationships in America is performance anxiety. Influenced by social media, pornography, and unrealistic standards, sex is increasingly measured rather than felt. People worry about attractiveness, endurance, comparison, and validation. These anxieties pull individuals out of embodied experience and into self-monitoring, reducing satisfaction and emotional presence. From a psychological perspective, this mirrors the broader romantic recession. Intimacy becomes something to manage rather than experience. Gendered experiences of sexual disconnection. Sexual disengagement does not affect everyone equally. Many women report feeling sexually desired but emotionally unsupported. Many men report feeling sexually uncertain, emotionally restricted, or fearful of misinterpretation. These patterns reflect deeper relational misalignments. When emotional communication breaks down, sexual intimacy becomes a site of misunderstanding rather than connection. Sex stops being a shared language and becomes a negotiation. Sex, loneliness, and the illusion of closeness. One of the most painful realities of America's romantic recession is that sexual activity has increased for some, while emotional loneliness has intensified. This challenges the assumption that sexual freedom automatically leads to fulfillment. Loneliness is not the absence of bodies, it is the absence of emotional recognition. Sexual contact without emotional attunement can amplify loneliness by highlighting what is missing. The result is a society that is sexually expressive, yet emotionally starving. Reimagining sexual intimacy in a fragmented culture. The decline of emotionally grounded sexual relationships does not indicate moral failure. It signals cultural misalignment. Intimacy requires time, presence, and emotional literacy. Resources increasingly scarce in modern American life. Yet there is growing awareness around sexual well-being, communication, boundaries, and emotional safety. These conversations point toward a future where sexual relationships are not merely acts, but relational experiences rooted in mutual care. This shift demands a redefinition of sexual success, not as conquest or performance, but as connection. Transition toward the closing reflection. The sexual dimension of America's romantic recession reveals a deeper truth. When emotional connection weakens, sexual intimacy cannot compensate, it collapses alongside it. To restore healthy sexual relationships, America must first restore the emotional conditions that allow desire, trust, and vulnerability to exist. In the final section, the question becomes clear. Can a culture built on speed, productivity, and self-protection make space again for intimacy, both emotional and sexual?